It's a fallacy to say that the blockade is simply 3 years old. It's been going on for decades. In truth, when we arrived in 2008 with the first Free Gaza mission, that was the first time in 41 years that anyone had sailed into Gaza by sea. So there's been a partial blockade for decades, and a severe blockade for many, many years, and a complete blockade for over 3 years now. What makes this even more ludicrous to think that the Israelis were surprised that we did resist is the fact that they came at 3:40 in the morning. Why wouldn't they wait? In fact, why wouldn't they wait until we were at least into Gaza's territorial waters? They came at 3:40 in the morning, middle of the night, under cover of darkness, and it's pretty clear that they knew that there was going to be a problem. That's why they were using night as cover. The BBC Panorama program was a complete insult to real journalists. The innuendo, omissions, outright lies were peppered throughout the entire so-called documentary. To say that it was impartial is beyond ridiculous, and it is clear that it's a violation of the BBC charter, which requires impartiality. So the program might as well have been produced by the Zionists themselves. BBC Panorama has developed a reputation over many years as being one of the hallmark programs in the BBC lineup, and they do indeed do some good programs. I've done many over the years, but in this particular case, this is one of their shining moments of low standards and propaganda. The BBC used the Panorama reputation, which is quite well established, and over the years many good programs have been produced by Panorama, and they used that reputation to be able to try and sully the reputation of the activists on board, myself included, and to paint a picture of us being the aggressors and the Israelis being the innocent victims, which really diminishes all of the good journalism that predates this program and diminishes the integrity of BBC and Panorama. For the Panorama program to even begin to expose the reality of the situation and give a true depiction of what's happening, it would have to show what's really happening in Gaza, and the program failed to do that miserably. Having been to Gaza myself, I have seen the suffering. There's 1.5 million people, 800,000 plus children there. We have children that are anemic, malnourished. All of them are traumatized to one degree or another. Having been bombarded in 2008, 2009. Many of them have lost family members, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. There's tremendous homelessness. Many people are living on piles of rubble, which used to be their homes. They don't have clean drinking water. Electric power plants aren't working properly. They live with a daily fear, drones flying overhead, attacks happening on almost a daily basis. To characterize the situation in Gaza as being simply a lack of freedom to travel and economic is beyond insulting. It's an absolute crime that Jane Corbin would even pretend as if the situation is anything but stark. The way that Hamas is characterized in the program is also part of the continuing propaganda that ignores important facts. It isn't that long ago we could look back to Nelson Mandela, who was called a terrorist by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and was spending a life sentence for refusing to renounce violence. Now, who is Nelson Mandela? The IRA, which was battling the British occupation of Ireland for centuries, also was involved in violent resistance. Hamas has clearly been involved in violent resistance, but they did win a democratic election. And instead of the international community giving Hamas a chance to use politics to resolve this conflict, they were pushed to the margins and backed into a corner. So I'd say that actually who's really at fault is us, those of us in the international community. But BBC Panorama just perpetuates the illusions and the lies that Hamas is an unreasonable and unworthy representative of the Palestinian people. One of the tactics used in the program is to say that Hamas, quote, rules Gaza. Now, if you can imagine that reporters in the Western world said that Barack Obama rules America, or David Cameron rules Britain, then you get an idea of just how this kind of phraseology really skews the facts. There's continual reference to the rockets that are being fired out of Gaza. It should be made clear that Hamas is not responsible for many of them. In fact, Hamas did honor a ceasefire. It was Israel that broke the ceasefire that led to the 2008-2009 invasion. You don't hear much about that, but you continually hear about the rockets being launched from Gaza. Now, these rockets are indiscriminate. Where they're fired, nobody knows. They're glorified fireworks. They're not explosive, and they haven't killed more than 10, 15 people over the years. The bottom line is that these rockets are really representative of a desperate kind of means for the people of Gaza to resist and try and force the world to pay attention. They don't really have any strategic value. Clearly, there's no way that militarily they're going to win with these feeble weapons. But the real problem is not the rockets being fired. That is the result. The root of the problem is the occupation, the denial of human rights, the theft of land, and the other continuing mass murders. So, the rockets are a result, not the root. If you look up the definition of Islamist in the World Dictionary online, it says effectively that Islamists are religious fundamentalists. So what we get is the impression is that those of us on board, or at least a segment of us, were radical, fundamental Islamic extremists who were hell-bent on killing Israelis. And that is the narrative that BBC was trying to portray, where they didn't have evidence, nor did they question the evidence of the Israelis. They took it at face value. They simply painted us as Islamists, which is really quite a derogatory term intended to cause doubt and question as to our intentions. Another insult to our intelligence in the so-called documentary is the reference to IHH being in the most Islamic area of Turkey. Turkey is virtually 100% Muslim. There are non-Muslims there, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a place that IHH could locate itself that wouldn't be virtually all Muslims. So I'm not sure what the point of that was, except for to further try and smear the people and make them all look like a bunch of radical extremists and violent. A legitimate documentary would cross-check the facts and also make sure that any footage used to support any perspective would be valid. And the use of this footage, which supposedly has members of the flotilla shouting insults about returning to Auschwitz and remember 9/11, which is some sort of ridiculous statement that I don't even understand what it means, just again diminishes the integrity of BBC hugely. It has no place, it's not verifiable, and certainly none of us that I know are aware of any kind of such language being used. It just doesn't have any place in a proper documentary. What's really very obvious is that the Israelis intended to attack that ship under cover of darkness, and that's clear. Now, they supposedly warned us 5 times that they would be forced to attack if we were heading into the disputed or hostile territory of Gaza's territorial waters. The truth of the matter is that we were 74 miles out to sea. We were not heading towards shore. We were actually running parallel to the coastline. So we never actually even came close to getting into the territorial waters, and that is exactly when the attack occurred. So whether they gave any warnings or not, there was no final warning actually stating that they were going to board or attack. And it really doesn't matter anyway, because we weren't in territorial waters, nor were we even heading towards territorial waters. I must say I really get a kick out of the idea of the Israelis saying that they were really surprised that there was any form of resistance. You can imagine Mossad, this vaunted intelligence service with all these resources, highly trained James Bond wannabes running all over the place. And it appears as if the Israelis want us to believe that they never actually bothered to watch international television, in which the leader of IHH made very, very clear that we would defend the ship with our bodies. So I guess the Mossad are a bunch of idiots that don't even know how to watch television, and gathering intelligence for them apparently doesn't even include monitoring television or newscasts. There are so many points in this program where things are stated by the Israelis that absolutely fly in the face of all logic and evidence, and yet there is no challenge to these statements. In particular, the accusation that we were trying to kill all of the commandos. This flies in the face of everything because I myself was involved in disarming 2 commandos. I took a 9mm pistol off of one of those commandos. It would have been the easiest thing in the world if I was a killer to end that commando's life right then and there. We had 3 of their commandos in our complete control, totally disarmed, surrounded by over 100 men, and yet we released them. So how is it possible that the BBC does not challenge a commando who says we were attempting to kill all of them and that we were all terrorists, when in fact we released 3 of theirs and gave them medical attention before we did that? The program goes out of its way to cast the Israelis as a legitimate authoritarian figure which has every right to do whatever it chooses to do, whereas we, on the other hand, are a bunch of rabble-rousers that are just up to trouble, don't really have an honorable mission, and are actually just closet racists running to Gaza to arm the resistance. It really is an insult to the intelligence of people. You know, for a long time, the Somali pirates were a big story, and there was definitely some altercations going on there and some piracy going on there. But I don't know of any case where the Somalis did even anything remotely close to what the Israelis did. And I just wonder if Britain or the United States or Greece or France or any country did what Israel did in international waters and killed, executed, quite frankly, 9 people and injured scores of others with bullet wounds, would they actually have the same treatment that the Israelis have gotten by the media? Because I really don't think so. And it says a lot about the world that we live in that the Israelis can do such a thing and get away with it, and who's actually in collusion with them. And BBC Panorama has officially endorsed the Israeli narrative and in effect has become a colluder with the piracy of Israel. One of the many things that are lost in the program is the fact that there are so many people who committed tremendous acts of heroism. I can think of Hanan Zoabi, the Israeli Knesset member, Palestinian Arab Israeli as they call him. When we had people dying, in fact one gentleman died in his wife's arms, bleeding to death because the Israelis would not medevac out some of the injured people. Hanan Zoabi was walking straight up to the Israelis as they were pointing rifles right at her and pleading with them in Hebrew to medevac these people out. And that's just one example of many examples in which people who were on board that ship really put their lives on the line for a cause that is noble and just, and yet none of that was represented at all in this program. The Panorama program really is a clinic in George Orwell's 1984. At one point, Jane Corbin talks about how the Israeli commandos boarded with non-lethal weapons, paintball guns, and she mentions that they also had 9mm pistols. What she doesn't mention is that the Israelis had sniper rifles, laser-guided sniper rifles. In fact, the first person that was killed was a photographer who was aiming his camera at one of these helicopters. The 9mm pistols are actually the weapons that were used to kill 8 of the 9 people, most at close range, execution style. So to say that the commandos were actually boarding the vessel with non-lethal weapons is pure George Orwell and an absolute insult and a travesty that it would even get on the air in the first place.